So the MOVE Act stands for Military Overseas Voter Empowerment Act, I think is what the acronym stands for. And it did a bunch of things to help military voters. Well, the main thing that people are talking about is it required all states to send out absentee ballots 45 days before the election. Because Congress basically said that our military voters aren't getting absentee ballots out in time. They don't have the time to vote. So we need to send it out 45 days before the election. It also said that a state could seek a waiver if it has hardship. And hardship is that the primary comes too late in the cycle, or let's say there's an election challenge. It's in court, and so the state doesn't know who the candidate's going to be after a primary. So those are the two times. Colorado, this was passed back in October of last year. I think October 22nd or so is when Congress passed it. The President signed it October 28th. Colorado said on October 28th, our Secretary of State said, no, we can't do it. We're not going to do it. So that was almost immediately Colorado said that they can't meet that 45-day deadline. And they said the reason we can't do it is because our primary date is too late. And they also said what we have now is good enough. We don't have to do this because we've already got good enough systems in place. What the Secretary of State said, Colorado Secretary of State, he said two things. First of all, it's too hard for us to meet the 45-day deadline, and what we have is good enough. So one of the things that he said is, well, we have it, it's good enough because we have this 8-day additional period. We can count military ballots that come in 8 days after the election. Colorado right now has a 32-day deadline before the election to get the ballots printed in the hands of the clerks and recorders ready to go. So if you add 32 days plus the 8 days, that's 40 days. That's not quite 45. The Secretary of State claimed that a lot of the clerks and recorders could get it out 40 days in advance, so 40 plus 8 gives you 48 days. He said that was enough. That's what he claimed. In the actual waiver request, the request that he sent to the feds, he said that we would be getting them out 32 days. So I think what happens, the Department of Defense said, look, 32 plus 8, that's not good enough. The Secretary of State, Bernie Busher, also said we have fax balloting and electronic mail balloting, voting. Fax voting and voting by electronic mail for military overseas voters. And he said that's good enough. That was part of his good enough excuse. It's really not good enough because the problem with that is that the military voter sacrifices the secrecy of the ballot. So you want to be able to let people have that choice if they want, but you don't want to force them to sacrifice the secrecy of their ballot. So the Department of Defense said, get the job done. They said, what you have is not good enough, and it's not too hard to get done. And here's the thing that's not come out that you might be interested in. Our Secretary of State, and here's the dirty secret, our Secretary of State never asked the clerks and recorders whether or not they could get this done. Did not ask all of the clerks and recorders if they could get it done until the Department of Defense required him to. So he said, oh, this is too hard to get done, but he never surveyed all the clerks and recorders, our local election officials. Our Secretary of State, they submitted the request for waiver August 4th. All right, that was Wednesday, August 4th. They had conversations with the Department of Defense, and the DOD said, hey, look, you got to talk to your clerks and recorders. And when you talk to your clerks and recorders, I think what they said is, give them some ways to solve it. Ask them if they can do it by just sending normal ballots in the mail, or what we call special, they're called special write-in absentee ballots, which have to be sent out 57 days in advance under Colorado law. So the Department of Defense made our Secretary of State send out the survey to the clerks and recorders to find out what was going on. And he didn't do that until August. Those results came back. 37 out of 64 counties responded. And you know what those 37 counties all said? With these procedures, we can get it done. So it's not too hard. So the Department of Defense's explanation was, you don't have hardship, and what you have is not adequate. That's really what they said. But if you look, and you can actually go online if you write about this, you can go online and you can look at the waiver application by the Secretary of State, and you can see the survey that they sent out. And you can see when they sent it out, and you can see the results that they got back. And you can see that the reason they sent it out, the reason they surveyed the clerks and recorders, was because the Department of Defense required them to. The Congress passed the bill in October of 2009. 6 days after Congress passed the bill, our Secretary of State said Colorado cannot comply. Our Secretary of State did nothing for 10 months, and then on August 6th of 2010, or I'm sorry, August 4th of 2010, almost 10 months later, 9.5 months later, that's when they submitted the waiver. So they waited about 9-10 months to submit the waiver. Last election, there were 16,000 military and overseas voters. This election right now, it looks as though there's going to be about 10,000, maybe 11,000 military and overseas civilian voters. Pure military is going to be about 1,100. You know, the worrisome thing is that if our Secretary of State has admitted, he's admitted that by following Colorado's normal deadlines, there's probably going to be some military voters who don't get the chance to vote because they're, you know, if they're in a remote battle. I served overseas in the military, and I was in country in Bosnia. This was about 14 years ago now. And it took us about 3 weeks to get our mail, and when we sent stuff back, it took about another 3 weeks. So 21 days plus 21 days, that's 42 days. That's pushing it a little bit close. I hope the mail is better nowadays. I mean, Congress passed the 45-day rule. It's better than it used to be. Hopefully we won't have any problems. You want to make sure everyone has a chance to vote who's eligible. And, you know, I mean, overseas military voters in particular, they're people who are willing to die, they're away from their families. It's, I mean, it's hard. And they're making sacrifices. And we as a state, we as a society ought to make sure that they have every opportunity to be able to vote as well. So I think that's important. I think the other thing that's really important is this. The Secretary of State's job is to, solve problems, help people vote. There were 10 months to plan for this. There's 10 months to figure it out. I think, you know, again, I'm a candidate myself, but I think that when you've got a Secretary of State who ignores a problem for 10 months, that's a real indicator that they may be ignoring other stuff too. So how we treat our military voters, I think, is an indicator of how we treat all of our voters. In Colorado, I think, well, nationwide, but in Colorado, I think it's absolutely critical that we count every eligible vote, and we make every effort to do so. Beaupre, like you say, Bob Beaupre beat Mike Feely by 121 votes in 2002. Another thing to remember, you know, now Congressman Jared Polis, he won his first election to the Board of Education, statewide race, the entire state of Colorado by 90 votes. So that was an incredibly close race. So Colorado has a history of close races. We're a purple state. Every single vote matters in this state, every single vote. I've been, in my legal practice, I've been involved in races that were dead ties, where they flipped a coin or they drew a card in order to do it. And in the last, and I know of 5 state legislative races that I'm aware of in the past 6 years that have been decided by around 100 votes or less. So it's, we have a history of close votes here.